Hi, fresh off her failure in Minnesota, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem turned her attention to lying about our elections, and she did it in Arizona, where Donald Trump attempted to overturn the results of the 2020 election.
And although the Constitution gives states the primary responsibility for running their elections, Congress also gives authorities and duties to the federal government. Now, as the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, those authorities lie within my department, and the responsibility lies with me.
I'd love to see her point to some statutory authority, just one thing that gives her that authority, because I just consulted my little pocket constitution again, and it says pretty clearly that the responsibility for time, manner, and place and enforcement of elections lies with the states, but that Congress can make amendments and adjustments, not the executive branch. Just yesterday, the Trump administration announced that it was ending the ICE debacle in Minneapolis that culminated in the deaths of 2 American citizens by federal agents under Kristi Noem's watch. We'll wait and see. And today, the Wall Street Journal is reporting on the chaos within the Homeland Security Department under Kristi Noem and her principal henchman, Corey Lewandowski, writing, quote, Noem has attempted to burnish her personal stardom at every turn. With Lewandowski, Trump's former campaign manager, at her side, she has staged a headline-grabbing immigration crackdown while sidelining rivals and dissenters. She's carried out confrontational operations over the objection of longtime immigration officials who warned such flashy displays would discredit the department's ultimate mission, according to 24 current and former administration officials. Within DHS, Noem and Lewandowski frequently berate senior-level staff, give polygraph tests to employees they don't trust, and have fired employees. In one incident, Lewandowski fired a U.S. Coast Guard pilot after Noem's blanket was left behind on a plane, according to people familiar with the incident, end quote. Well, she left her blanket on the plane. Kristi Noem's appearance in Arizona comes as the Trump Justice Department is suing that state. Quoting the Arizona Republic, Trump's DOJ is suing for, quote, voter registration and election records that the Arizona Secretary of State's office says it can't legally hand over. Arizona is among 23 states sued by the federal government over voter data. Opponents in the states that have refused to cooperate have said the Justice Department is seeking information to bolster Trump's unfounded claims of a stolen election in 2020 and expressed worry about how the personal information will be used in the future, end quote. And that's just one part of a larger strategy by Donald Trump and Republicans to undermine the midterm elections. Last week, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, inexplicably appeared at a raid at a Georgia election office, which is another state that Donald Trump keeps claiming that he won in 2020. And they were there to seize election records. 2020 election records are being seized by Tulsi Gabbard, who's the Director of National Intelligence, like spies and stuff elsewhere. This week, the Republican-controlled House passed a bill under pressure from Donald Trump to address widespread voter fraud that doesn't exist and would disenfranchise potentially millions of American citizens in the process. The New York Times reports, quote, it would require voters to show proof of citizenship not only when registering to vote, but also every time they went to cast a ballot in a federal election. It's a show me your papers kind of law in a nation that rejects that mentality. It's highly unlikely to pass in the Senate. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski said she would oppose it and called it, quote, federal overreach. Today, Donald Trump made this false claim on social media, quote, there will be voter ID for the midterm elections, whether approved by Congress or not. Donald Trump tried to steal the 2020 election. He's basically telling us he's going to try it again. Joining us now is the Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton of Arizona. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs and Transportation and Infrastructure Committees. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be here.
There's a little gaslighting going on about voter ID, right? At some point in the voting process, in the registration process, generally speaking, people have to provide some ID. Varies from state to state. That's not what the SAVE Act is about. The SAVE Act is actually talking about proof of citizenship, which means a birth certificate, a naturalization certificate, a passport, or an enhanced ID, which only exists in driver's license, which only exists in 5 states. That's a whole different thing.
Well, first off, what the SAVE Act would do is require every single state to hand over voter data. That is completely and totally illegal. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution protects states' right. There is no legal authority for the federal government to ask states like Arizona to hand over voter data. So number one, that's the reason why the SAVE Act will be found unconstitutional if it ever were to become law. Secondarily, yes, it does put very onerous requirements. Imagine someone you have to register to vote in person. Imagine if you live in a rural Arizona or a tribal community, that can be a 5-6 hour drive, where right now you can do it perfectly safely via the mail. That's a simple situation. What about someone who doesn't have a passport and may not have a certified copy of their birth certificate? They may not be in a position then to be able to prove that they are a United States citizen using those particular mechanisms. That puts a lot of people disenfranchised as a result of not having the proper paperwork. Millions and millions of Americans couldn't utilize that paperwork.
More than half of Americans don't have a passport. Lots of people can't find their birth certificate. Lots of people change their name because they got married or they got divorced or for whatever reason. And the birth certificate doesn't match their current. We know of these instances where people say they go to register and they say, well, your name doesn't match your birth certificate because, my parents didn't know who I was going to marry, so they gave me their name. This is real stuff.
And it's all based on the big lie.
Yes,
it is
based on nothing.
Yeah. We have a wonderful voting system in the United States of America. We have a wonderful voting system right here in Arizona. Trump won in 2016. Joe Biden won in 2020. Trump won again in 2024. The only one they're looking at is 2020. And when these secretaries like Kristi Noem are out of favor with Trump, obviously she got fired from the work that they were doing in Minnesota. She did a terrible job leading FEMA for the Texas floods. She's on the outs. And what do? They come to a place like Arizona and just repeat the big lie. That's why Tulsi Gabbard was in Fulton County. She's on the outs with the administration as well. So what does she do? Right. They play to an audience of one and continue to repeat the big lie. That's what this is really all
and then
about.
Donald Trump starts floating this idea of, this happened in Arizona with the cyber ninjas, where they started talking about Chinese and the bamboo and Italians and all. I think Trump suggested the Venezuelans are involved. You just plant these seeds. I want to remind people, I think Arizonans understand this very well. The problem in America is not non-citizens voting. It's citizens not voting enough, right? 60% of people turn out in presidential elections. That number, I would love to be 100. That's what we have to solve for. We don't need to put friction in where no problem exists.
We would be a stronger democracy if we made it easier for people to participate in the election. Let's make Election Day a national holiday so that more and more people can participate in the election. Let's make ballots by mail, voting by mail, easier for our fellow Americans. That would get greater participation in our elections. That would help build a stronger democracy, not continuation of the repeating the big lie over and over and over again. That makes us weaker as a country.
So Secretary Noem said that Arizona is an absolute disaster when it comes to elections. I've spent a lot of time in Arizona, and despite what Donald Trump liked to say about the 2020 elections, it's not only not a disaster. Voting in Arizona is kind of exemplary.
Well, and actually, she picked the wrong state to make the case for the SAVE Act, because under Arizona law, you actually do have to show DPOC, documented proof of citizenship, before you're allowed to participate. What we don't require is that you prove citizenship each and every time you vote. Once you prove you're a citizen, you get to participate in our election. So the state of Arizona is actually a model state for the exact thing that they're trying to point out. But what we won't do is hand over that voter data. That is a violation of the Constitution. The SAVE Act would require it. And that alone is a reason we can never let the SAVE Act become the law in our country. And if it does become law, it'll be legally challenged and it'll be thrown out.
You think, talking about things getting thrown out, you think Kristi Noem should be thrown out, or at least impeached?
She has to. I mean, she is one of the worst cabinet secretaries in American history. Everything she touches, she blows. She screws up. I mentioned her role with FEMA after the Texas floods. They were so slow to respond. They didn't get urban search and rescue teams there until 3 days after they found the last body. They could have worked to save lives. She blew that completely. Obviously, what we've seen happen in Minnesota, she has no business running a law enforcement entity. Untrained officers going out there wearing those masks without any use of force policy. Those tragic deaths were inevitable. That's a direct result from the poor leadership from Kristi Noem. She got fired because of it. She got kicked out. They put Tom Homan in charge of the work in Minnesota. And now she's coming to Arizona to repeat the big lie. She's got to go. If the president won't fire her, she needs to be impeached.
I remember this from 2020. Arizonans are not interested in this. So you guys will sort it out. Thank you for being with us tonight, Congressman Greg Stanton of Arizona.
Thank you.